It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest of brew the Magic world. You know what the motto is: ABB, always be brewing, baby. And today we're doing it. Deck list is down in the description for you below. Is Xenagos, God of Rebels, a Gruul god from Theros. Indestructible as long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7. Xenagos is not a creature. And at beginning of combat on your turn, another creature you control gains haste and +X/+X till end turn, where X is that creature's power. Xenagos is a well-known commander, and this is my first time tackling Xenagos on the channel. I did it because I think his mini-me got released in Foundations. We'll talk about that when we get there. But I wanted to come back. This is a deck that Mikey has loved from time to time and has played. And a deck that I've kind of always wanted to take my shot at because I think it's everything I love about Gruul. And so why not do it? Why not have some fun for you today and talk about Xenagos? We're going to talk about ramping up to get to our big creatures. We're going to talk about other ways we can give haste, so it's not just Xenagos needing to give haste to our creatures. We'll talk about the dream team, the creatures we want to see, the creatures we want to see every game and get in. And then we'll talk about combat. At the end of the day, Gruul does one thing well, and it's smash in the face. And so we're going to talk about it, how to get multiple combats each turn, make our way into dealing big damage each turn, and even potentially take unlimited combats for ourselves. But we start with ramp because I think ramp is so important to Green's identity, and it's what we're going to try to do here. Creatures that can either make us mana or reduce the cost of the spells we cast. Goblin Archamancer there in the middle reduces each red or green spell by 1. That's nice. Again, bringing all of our creatures down 1 mana step. Fnatic, Aronis, and Gwen are both great mana dorks in their own right. Fnatic taps for a single green, and if we control a creature power 4 or greater, it can tap for 4 green. And then Gwenna taps for any 2 mana in any combination of colors. We could spend it to only cast creatures or activate abilities of creatures. And when we cast a creature with power 5 or greater, we get to actually untap Gwenna and put a counter on it. It leads to turns where you could potentially use Gwenna multiple times in a turn for lots of mana. Salval is a classic mana producer. Whenever a creature comes in under our control, whenever another creature comes in, its controller can draw a card. It has the greatest power among all other creatures on the battlefield. And for a green mana into it, we can get X mana in any combination of colors, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. So the bigger the creature we have, the more mana we get out of Salvala. Summerworld Sage just taps for 3 mana, but only to cast creatures. And then Whisper Wilds has that ferocious ability, but it's only 2 green if we have a creature power 4 or greater. But again, the point is, get this mana as we go up the curve into our big creatures. But I think haste is important, because at the end of the day, the only thing that holds us back as a creature deck is not being able to get in the turn things come down. And there's some other cards in the deck that do that. Halana Elena is very similar to Xenagos. The difference is Halana Elena gives a creature haste and counters, but counters equal to Halana Elena's power, not that creature's power. So it's a teeny bit different, but still very useful. Sravan Goreclaw, one of my favorite commanders, gives each non-token creature that comes in a counter and haste, and gives all other creatures trample. And then Rhythm of the Wild, that classic Gruul enchantment. Creatures can't be countered, and non-token creatures that come in have riots, or our choice of haste or a +1/+1 counter, and they come in. This can work really well with Xenagos, because if we know what we're going to pick, we can have it come with a +1/+1 counter, and then give it haste with Xenagos, or vice versa, depending on how many creatures we get in a board state. But here we go. Here's the big dumb Gruul creatures. Here's the things we care about. And I'm going to start with what I call Xenagos' mini-me, an Ashroot Animist, a 4 mana 4/4 lizard druid with trample. It says when it attacks, another target creature gets trample and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is that creature's power. So here's this ability just in a different light, but again, very good when it can be done on anything. Again, Ashroot has to attack to do it, but again, the point is that it's that creature's power and not Ashroot's power. So the bigger that creature is, the better it gets. I think the card that was potentially made for Xenagos is Anzrag the Quake Mole. Whenever it becomes block, we untap each creature we control, and there's an additional combat. Additional combat after this one, and then for 7 mana, Anzrag has to be blocked to this combat if able, potentially leading with enough creatures on board for us to take multiple combats that turn as Anzrag just continues to smash into our opponents. The key one you want to see is Anzrag plus Xenagos, as Xenagos grows Anzrag each combat, making it brutal to deal with. Obviously, Anzrag's great when it has Trample, being able to pierce through for big damage. But the thing I like about Anzrag is you actually have a world where Anzrag could either force an opponent to block not to die to get us another combat, or force another combat with its ability. Atarka Worldbender is just a great attacker in its own right, a 6/4 flying trampler that whenever a dragon we control attacks, it gains double strike on turn. So it has double strike, and then every other dragon that's out with Atarka has double strike as well. Galta, one of my favorite dinosaurs, a 12/12 for 12 that can come down a whole lot cheaper in most decks. And a great Xenagos target, flipping to a 24/24 with Trample. Giant Adaphage may look odd to some people, but I think it's a great creature because whenever it hits a player in combat, you make a copy of it. And having a bunch of 7/7 insects with Trample doesn't seem like a bad idea, especially as you start taking multiple combats. And if they can come in with haste, it means they can start attacking too, making more giant Adaphages as you just attack your opponents. Hydra Omnivore is another target that I thought of immediately for Xenagos. Whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. This is really nice because if you can hit a player who is wide open and hit the players who have blockers, I think it's a no-brainer. With Xenagos, Hydra Omnivore immediately becomes a 16/16, ready to party. And that's a lot of damage to spread, even if it's on every player. But I think the creature that, to me, I've always wanted to play in Xenagos, and when you can get it in, it's a ton of fun, is Ilharg, the Raised Boar, the Boar God of the Gruul. 5 mana, 6/6 Trampler that says when it attacks, you can put a creature card from your hand on the battlefield tapped and attacking. You return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step, so it comes back at the end step. This is great because you get to cheat that creature in for just one combat. But when we get into the multiple combats, if you give a creature haste, if it comes in with haste, say with something like Rhythm of the Wild, now it can keep attacking on each of the combats, and Ilharg could potentially get multiple triggers throwing creatures down to attack. But when it dies or it's put into exile from the battlefield, we can put it into our library third from the top, which isn't bad at all. Ohir Kaslam is a creature I've always liked in Goreclaw, and I think it fits well here. Whenever it hits a player, you could reveal that many cards on the top of your library and put a creature and or a land card from among them onto the battlefield for free. So this could cheat in some big creatures and get you some ramp. I like this card a ton. When it dies, it becomes a land on the backside that can reflip back over. But again, a 6/5 that can become a 12/11 and start hitting doesn't seem like a bad thing when you could start looking at the top 10th of your deck and pick some fun things. Quilled Great Worm from the new set feels great whenever a creature deals damage to a player on our turn. We get to put that many counters on it. So basically, now those creatures are going to start retaining their powers, if not more, and it can just become brutal for our opponents to deal with if we get a couple combats with Great Worm out, growing our creatures and maximizing that damage. Well, Railway Brawler puts counters on each creature, the other creature that comes in equal to its power. A great way to buff it when it comes in, and then allows Xenagos to buff it again and give it more privilege. Railway Brawler also has Trample and Reach, so it's not a bad blocker for us. Twin Flame Tyrant from the new set feels a great one here since we want to be dealing damage, right? We want to get into combat. It doubles all damage a source we control would deal to an opponent or a permanent opponent controls. So this plus Xenagos plus Trample means that we're going to deal a ton of damage, and Twin Flame Tyrant's in the air, so it's not a bad attacker. It is only a 3/5, but I don't think we care because that doubling is going to make it brutal the more we have on board. And then, of course, you can have a combat deck without some sort of doubling power, and Open Draw is here for it. Beginning of each combat, you're going to double the power and toughness of each creature you control till end of turn. If this and Xenagos are out at the same time, you stack this above Xenagos, double a creature's power, Xenagos doubles it again, and now you're in a world where a creature might be able to just one-shot a player if they are not careful. This is only a small section of the creatures we have in this deck that could be very scary in the right scenarios. But I think this is where this deck shines, and this is where this deck can get very difficult to deal with. It does create some interesting lines that you gotta pay attention to. But if you can make it right, I think this is really fun. There's a couple creatures that have this ability. The first we're going to talk about over here is Bloodthirster on the left. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we get to untap it. After this combat, there's an additional combat phase. So the way this works is Bloodthirst is going to hit a player. It'll untap, get additional combat, but it can't attack the player it already attacked. Well, with Xenagos out, it's a 12-12 on their first attack, doubles to a 24, right? Then would double to a 48. So you have a chance to take a player out, maybe even two, depending on where life totals are at with Bloodthirster alone. Now, the difference between Bloodthirst and Portraiser on the right, Portraiser having a very similar ability, is Portraiser untaps all creatures you control and gives you another combat phase. So instead of just untapping itself, it untaps all of them and says, hey, let's go have some fun again. Same thing, Portraiser can't attack a player it's already attacked this turn, but that's fine, because now you're getting extra combats to keep the party going, right? And make sure that we get some good attacks in. Karlach, Fury of Avernus is great, because whenever we attack for the first time each turn, we untap all creatures, they get First Strike, which is a great ability, especially when we start dealing with Trample. And then we get an additional combat. So then, First Strike plus Trample means that we're going to hopefully stop anything that might be in our way, deal big damage, get into that second combat, get another Xenagos trigger. I think the thing we have to remember about Xenagos is it's at the start of combat, meaning each combat we take is a new Xenagos trigger, meaning if we know we're going to take multiple combats, we can plan who's going to get Xenagos' trigger when and give them those buffs. But here on the screen, I'll present you with what would be considered a pretty common, I won't call it infinite because it's not, it's basically unlimited combat, using Aggravated Assault. An enchantment says for 5 mana, we can untap all creatures we control, and if it's a main phase currently, there's an additional combat followed by additional main phase and activate only as a sorcery. So we can only do it at sorcery speed. Now you're asking, how do we get the 5 mana for Aggravated Assault? There might be a world where we might have that much mana, but there's a lot of ways we could do this. We have things like Savage Ventmaw over there on the left that adds 6 mana and we don't lose it for the rest of the turn. Well, I could pay for Aggravated Assault. Nature's Will over on the right says whenever one or more creatures deal combat damage to a player, we could tap all lands that player controls and untap all lands we control. Well, if we have at least 5 lands, Nature's Will make sure that it will always be able to pay for Aggravated Assault. And you can see that this shell can be expanded on. And that's going to get me into the normal spiel I give, which is that this is my version 1.0 of the deck, which means there are things we need to look at in testing. And the main one is there are creatures that can make us mana when they hit. The big one that's not on the screen that I thought I did, but I didn't, is something called Gnawbone. A creature that says whenever creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we make that many treasures, right? That factors into the Aggravated Assault, right? There's a lot of ways to manipulate the Aggravated Assault shell, and so that's what we want to do, right? If we can, assume that shell and just basically take as many combats as we want. But I think the big thing to talk about Xenagos as we go into testing is your budget. I've tried my best to make what I think is a good deck for our budget, but the truth is there's a lot of really great creatures that cost more than $20, and I didn't want to put too many of them in because I wanted to make sure we had enough of the support pieces. But all 3 of these on the screen are creatures that I really like for the deck. They're just above $20. I love Pathbreaker Ibex. Card that says when it attacks, all of our creatures get trample and +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Here's a repeatable Craterhoof Behemoth on attack. It's such a good card, but it's $25. And I think some people are going to say, what, it's $25 or I approximate X, and that's perfectly fine. For some people, Pathbreaker may not be a card you want to spend $25 on and not see every game. Sire of 7 Deaths feels like a house of value for 7 mana. First Strike, Vigilance, Menace, Trample, Reach, Lifelink. You're going to gain so much life off the Sire in this deck. But again, $25 price tag, Faultborn Tyrant beside it, another $25, $30 price tag. Whenever it or another creature with power 4 or greater comes in, you gain 3 life and draw a card. This is an effect we have in the deck, this power 4 or greater draw. We have a couple other ones in the deck, but Tyrant's better because when it dies, it comes back again as a token. And again, great body, draw, card draw, great in combat. There's so many of these creatures, there's like 6 or 7 that I didn't put in the deck that you could find in the deck list or they're considering I really wanted to put in. But when it comes to budget, like I try my best to keep a budget on the show because I want it to be somewhat realistic. And so that's the reason they're not in there. But I actually decided to build a bigger budget version of this for myself. And if you're interested in that, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll talk about that when I do some testing. Let's get into playtest number 1. Keeping a 2-lander with Sakura Tribelder, a creature that can sacrifice to go get another land. Carolidid, another one of these. Mana Dorks, 1 mana of any color regularly, but if we have power 4 or greater, we get 2. Defiler Vigor, a great green creature that will start buffing all of our creatures when we cast green permanents. Srock, the Hunt Caller, can give out haste every turn as long as we have creatures of power 8 or greater total. And then Rampant Growth for some ramp. I like this. We've got multiple ramp pieces. We can work our... well, Ilharg's a great way to start. We'll get that game trail down. Turn 2, we see the Ashroot Animist. Okay, so we're working our way up. I guess there's probably arguments here, which is the better play. The Steve, the Carolited, the Rampant Growth. We'll play the Carolited just to, I guess, protect from early attacks, but really just to have a mana dork on bird. Turn 3, we see the Forest, which is now perfect because I can Rampant Growth plus Steve. I'll sack Steve at the same time, just basically to make sure that I can go get... just to save the time when I'm looking through the deck. Now we have 5 mana coming into turn 4. It would have been great if we drew land there, but that's a-okay. So Xenagos is 5. I think we always want Xenagos down, but the truth is if we can commit to the board and make things even better, I don't see a reason not to. Like something like Defiler Vigor seems really good here. Set up this turn to explode next turn. So the way Defiler Vigor works is we can pay 2 life instead of a green pip and a spell to just make that spell 1 green less. This could be really useful next turn, allowing us to potentially cast multiple things. Right now, Carolid's tapping for 2, right, instead of a 1. So we're going to have 7 mana next turn. I mean, there's a world where we could Animus plus Xenagos next turn, right, by just paying 4 life. And you could start to see where this can take off. So we didn't get anything better. So I think that's what we do. We Animist for 3, paying 2 life for that. All of our creatures get a counter because of Defiler of Vigor. And then we pay 4 for Xenagos, which is going to come in as a creature because we have enough devotion. And there we go. We put a counter on everything. Now we're going to go to combat. The Animist can't attack yet, but I feel I would say Xenagos give it to the Animist since Defiler of Vigor is a 7 or an 8/8 right now. Trample. Attack with these 2. Animist will just buff Defiler, making it a 16/16 right now. It's a big trampler that's in here on turn 5. We're starting to get in big damage. And now we come into the next turn. Ooh, Natural Order is a great choice. So Natural Order could go get us any green creature by sacrificing a green creature. This could be an interesting choice. I mean, there's a lot of great green creatures in our deck that could get us a lot of big value. But I think with 7 mana and the ability to use this, I think the answer is probably just Bloodthirster. I have to pay the full 6 for it, right? Because it's not a green permanent and it actually won't trigger Defiler of Vigor. But I go to combat, right? Xenagos gives Bloodthirster to the buff, so it's a 12/12 this combat. Attack, I can have Ashroot buff it, or I could have Ashroot buff Xenagos, or have it buff Defiler, right? Take the first combat. Now we go into the second combat. I can have Xenagos buff Bloodthirster again, or I could buff something else. But again, I think you want to buff the Bloodthirster, just start cascading that damage. Remember, 12 first combat, 24 second combat, 48 third combat. That third combat could knock a player out. So what I would say is when you're planning these 3 attacks, right? If you know the player you're going to attack third, try to focus your attacks on the other 2 attacks to take big damage, right? On the other 2. Now, I don't think this board could knock. Well, it could. I mean, Animus could buff the Defiler of Vigor for the first combat, take big damage on the first player that you attacked with the Bloodthirster, and kind of have them alternate. You may be able to take a table out here on turn 6. I think it'd be close because the Ashroot could deal some damage in there as well. But again, this starting at 8, going to 16 because of Ashroot, Bloodthirster going up, and it would go to 36 next turn, right? I think it'd be a pretty brutal attack for our opponents to deal with, and goes to show you some of that explosiveness that Xenagos can have. Playtest number 2, keeping a 3-lander with that Summerwald Sage, a great mana dork. And we see Gulta and Cultivate. So we got a little bit of ramp right involved. We'll get the Citterglade tapped because I don't see anything else to do turn 1. Oh, sorry, we also have Relentless Assault, a way to take an extra combat. We'll chill here on turn 2. I don't see much else I can do. Turn 3 here is where we get the first diversion point. Do we Cultivate? Kona's a pretty fun one. Start of your second main phase. If it's tapped, you can put any permanent from your hand on the battlefield. A great way to start cheating these creatures in. If I Summerwald Sage next turn, or this turn, I can play a creature next turn. I feel like the answer is cultivate, just to be safe. Again, it delays us a turn. Sorry, the mount goes to our hand. But I feel like it's what we need to do. So here at turn 5, we've got 5 mana. Sumberwald. And again, we hold up some mana, make people think we have something. So here on turn 6, now we have 9 mana. 3 of it that can only be used for creatures. I'm thinking Ilharg. Ilharg's 5. Kona Xenagos, right? Xenagos wouldn't be a creature. Buff Kona, have Kona attack. At our second main, it will be tapped. And I think I would put, again, Galta's going to come down pretty cheap now. Let's put down, I guess, Savage. Well, let's put down Ilharg, so that way it can attack next turn. We see Mosswort Bridge, a great land that can hide away to get us some value. Here again, 9 mana, right? We want to try to get 3, 4, 5, 6. We need to get something down right to turn him on. I'm thinking Karlach, that turns on Xenagos as a creature, and then Galta. Galta's going to come down for just 2 there, so 5 for that and 2 for Galta. Still would have a couple left over, but the point is, Karlach, right, gives the extra combat. So Xenagos turns Galta online this combat. Have an attack with it. Ilharg would just put the Savage Ventmaw down, I'm thinking, in the air attacking somebody. And then we would untap for another combat. Again, Savage Ventmaw doesn't have haste, so it can't attack. But I think I might just buff Galta again. Right now it's a 48, potentially knocking somebody out here this turn. Attack anybody else. I guess we'll put the Mosswort Bridge down with Kona. Not that it really matters. I mean, we could have played our land anyway. See the Unwritten makes the most sense, getting a bunch of creatures. Ventmaw goes back to our hand, but it did add the mana. But it goes back at the end of the end stuff. I guess I could have Relentless Assaulted again and just had fun there. Another combat there, because this adds the mana right when it attacks. But again, it goes to show you that, with these right pairings, you can really get big damage off. Here we're keeping a little more of an interesting hand. 2-lander with Soul Rings, all right? People are going to have their opinions on this one. Ruby, Cultivate, Up the Beanstalk, Chaos. Not a ton of big creatures, but we've got a lot of the ramp you want to see. Ooh, Anzrag isn't a bad way to start. I was going to say the awkward part about this hand is that we're missing something to make this be able to tap for both, but I think that's A-okay. You get the land and the Soul Ring down here. 2. I could go Ruby into a Cultivate. We could go Ruby into Carolitted. I'm thinking Ruby into Cultivate. My only thought here is that we can get a, right, make sure we get a land in this turn so that the Verge is online. But mainly, right, Ruby paid for it, so now we were really taking advantage of that. Turn 3, sitting here is 6 mana, right? Xenagos is 5, so... Sorry, 7 mana, right? So we play the Up the Beanstalk and draw, right? And then I think we just... Well, do we play Xenagos? Now that I draw Goreclaw, I think Goreclaw is the better play. It won't draw off the Beanstalk because it's not mana value 5. But the thing about Goreclaw that's really nice is... We don't have to tap Ruby to do it, but now it's going to reduce all of our creatures power 4 or greater. So Xenagos is now down to 3 mana. The Crusher is down to 3 mana. Anzrag is down to 2 mana. Goreclaw is such a great reducer in a deck like this. Again, nothing we can do that turn because Goreclaw doesn't have haste. Now we can attack with Ruby if we want to. It'll be a 3/4, but I mean, I don't think we need to. This turn we draw Ashroot. Okay, so Ashroot's down to 2 mana because of Xenagos, or because of Goreclaw. So we're at 4, 5 colored mana, 2 colorless. So I think there's a world we can't get Ashroot, Anzrag, and Xenagos down, but we could get Xenagos plus either Ashroot or Anzrag or that. Either way, we can get them down. I think I'll start with Xenagos just to see what we draw. Again, if it becomes a creature this turn, it becomes a creature. It's not going to have a snow. We draw a mountain. Yeah, we can play for turn because of the cultivate, right? Did we already play land for turn? I think we missed a land drop. Yeah. That's okay. Now I think I'd play Anzrag. Anzrag won't trigger up the Beanstalk. Or, yeah, because it's only 4 mana value. But that's okay. Xenagos is now a creature. But I think, again, buff Anzrag, get it going. Gorkal will attack, giving it haste, right? Or giving it trample, sorry. So now it's a 16-8. 16-12 with trample. So now our opponents have to be careful of it. If they block it, now we get another combat buff it again, right? And now all we need to do is just find, 1 or 2 more pieces to keep the party going. Asher Animus feels like a good idea to buff another creature. Horsewood Crasher will get us tokens whenever a creature with trample deals damage. So there's a lot of good here. I think I'd play the Crasher for 3 mana just to get the draw. Right, nothing too good. So we'll get the Animist down. Go to combat. If I buff the Animist can buff something else, and the Animist can attack, right? So I'm thinking, make the Animist have haste, or yeah, haste in the buff. Give the buff to, I guess, Gorklaw and attack. Maybe we can get Anzrag somewhere where it needs to be blocked to make sure we get another combat. But again, here you could also just buff the Anzrag and attack with Gorklaw again, giving both of these, this 8-8 and this, the 16 trample again. And now any damage you're dealing is making us that dinosaur beast. And now if our opponents don't have the wipe, we're in the exact same spot we were the last 2 games where we've done so much damage and our opponents have to deal functionally with what we have. I think what I like about Xenagos is it is a true mid-range deck. Your opponents either have what they need to deal with it, or we're just going to run away with the game and have some fun. So I'd love to know what you think of Xenagos, and I will catch you guys next time.